Hello, I'm Izzy at Minerva. Today we're going to be looking at how to hack our Minerva Exclusive Gemma Dress sewing pattern. So in this hack video, all I mean by hack is that I'm going to alter and change the pattern using it as a starting point to create something creative and different. The joy of doing this is that once you've sewn the Gemma dress once and you've got all your fitting alterations and you're happy with the way it fits, then you can use the pattern almost as like a starting off, like a jumping off point to then create all sorts of different types of dresses, or even tops actually, or skirts. There's lots of things you can do with the pattern once you've got the basic fit right. So this is going to be really fun. This video also forms part of a mini series of different hack and alteration videos that you can take a look at on a Minerva YouTube playlist. So do check that out. In today's video, we're going to take the original pattern and change it so that it looks like this. And that's going to be a gorgeous little puff sleeve. So we're going to change the length of the sleeve so it's shorter and it's like puffier, and then we're also just going to shorten the skirt as well so it feels a bit more summery, and then we're also going to alter the neckline. So we've actually got quite a few little changes on this. So let's dive straight on into the pattern drafting. In order to follow along, you're obviously going to need your pattern cut out in your size, which will be different to mine, but you can follow along with the same principles exactly how I'm showing them in this video, no matter what size you've cut or how much you've graded or how much you've shortened or lengthened your pattern pieces. So that's really good. And once we've drafted out all of our pattern pieces and made all those alterations, we're then going to sew it up together. So I will demo all of the sewing steps which differ from the original sewing instructions, and then we're going to take a look and see what it looks like. Okay, are you ready? Let's do it. Okay, I'm going to raise the hem by 20 centimeters. And I'm just going to dash that out all the way along the existing hemline. And then cut along that line you just dashed out. Take your skirt front pattern piece H and repeat that process by dashing out a 20 centimeter offset from the existing hem, and then cut that out. Okay, next let's look at the sleeve pattern piece. So we want to shorten the sleeve. Right now it's practically full length, so the length that you want it to be will really depend on your personal preferences. It really just depends where you want it to sit. So I would recommend measuring underneath your armpit down, and that will determine the length that you want this to be. Now I'm going to do it at 10 centimeters down from there, and just do the same on the other side, 10 centimeters down. Then just draw a line straight across. Now the line should be perpendicular to the grain line. And then cut that out. Okay, and now that we've shortened it and said where we want the length to be, what we need to do next is actually to create that sort of extra puffiness, which is going to be fun. So let's do that now. Draw a line that's perpendicular to the sleeve cuff and that lines up with the front notch. Do the same for the back notch. Measure the distance between those two lines. For me it's 28, and then divide that by 4. Offset distances from the first line, which are then that distance apart, for me 7 centimeters apart, and then square up. Next, cut along each of those lines. Excellent. What we want to do now is basically kind of make space in between each of those pieces so that we've got an equal amount of space between each and every one of them. So push all your pieces to one side. Grab a piece of paper and pop it underneath your first pattern piece. Draw a straight line along the bottom. I'm going to increase each of the panels by exactly 3 centimeters. So draw a line parallel to the first cut line at 3 centimeters. Then take your second sleeve segment and just line it up at the bottom and line it up with that 3 centimeter offset and tape it in place. Repeat for the remaining 4 pattern pieces. Just like that. Now, draw in your new sleeve head up at the top. So what we're trying to do is basically create like a smooth sleeve head. And really it should take into account the highest section of each of the sleeve pieces. So it's going to look something like this. Then just add those little notches in for the back and the notch was here effectively for that side over there. On our original pattern piece, we also had this gather between the dots, but actually what we want to do now is basically gather between the notches now. So gather between is not the dots. And we need to update the pattern piece on the front as well to remind ourselves of that. So next, we're literally just going to remove that slight curve to the arm side by drawing a straight line down that is perpendicular to the bottom of our cuff right now. Do the same on the other side. And then I want to create a little casing that's just 1.5 centimetres deep. So draw a 1.5 centimetre offset from the bottom of your pattern piece. Okay, and that's the pattern piece done. Annotate your pattern piece if you feel like you need to. Obviously you're just going to be cutting 2 again as usual, and then cut out your pattern piece, and that's your sleeve done. Now let's move on to the front pattern piece. Okay, so here's our front bodice piece, and what we want to do is just create a slightly different styled neckline, and then we want to create a little placket tie up the front. So first of all, let's create our style line. I'm just going to drop the neckline by 6 centimetres. It's not a huge amount, but it's enough just to give us a little bit more definition. Then just find a soft curve that you like, making sure it meets up at the shoulder point, up there. Cut along that style line. Okay, the original pattern piece was cut on the fold, but we're actually going to create 2 pattern pieces, and they're going to tie up at the front. So we're going to create some little eyelets that are going down to either side of the centre front, which is this strip right here. Place a piece of tracing paper over your original front pattern piece, and then just dash out the centre front line. Draw a parallel line 5 centimetres offset from that centre front line. Finish off the bottom curve just by tracing around the bottom of the piece like that. Next, working from the neckline, mark a 6.5 centimetre offset. Now this is slightly wider simply to accommodate the 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. You'll see what I mean in a minute. What we're doing right now is basically creating our facing. Lovely. Now what I want us to do is to flip that piece of tracing paper over, mirroring it along the centre front line. Okay, just like that. And basically what we're going to do now is add this piece onto here to create one pattern piece. Okay, so just like that. So when we sew this, just so that it's clear, we're going to fold it along the centre front line. So that is going to fold over like that to create a really nice facing. And rather than create 2 separate pieces, I've created one piece to reduce the bulk that might happen here if we had a seam allowance. So it's going to give us a really nice clean finish at that point. The only thing we need to do now is we need to add the location for the little eyelets so that we can create that tie up the front. These just want to be evenly spaced out down the centre front. Draw a little dashed line at 1.5 centimetres offset from the centre front on your main pattern piece size. Dash out your seam allowance along the bottom of that V, so you can see exactly where your stitch line is going to stitch to once you've sewn your garment together. So the bottom of the neckline is at that junction there. Now, depending on your eyelet size, I'm going to want to put an eyelet basically at that point. So mark your first eyelet at the 1.5 centimetre offset at that point there. Then also working down at the bottom, my stitch line at 1.5 centimetres is going to be at that point there. And I think really I'm fine with just putting my first eyelet 1.5 centimetres above that. So this will also be an eyelet. Measure the distance between those 2 eyelets. For me, it's 15. I want to put another 3 eyelets in between these 2. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 little spaces. So I'm going to divide the length between the 2 eyelets by 4. And my offsets are going to be a 3.75 each. So working along the bottom line, mark your offsets of each eyelet to make sure that you're getting a nice even distribution between each of them. Don't forget that we're not going to cut one on the fold, we're actually going to cut 2 of these pattern pieces separately. That's that pattern piece now done. Now the only other thing with the front pattern piece is that we need to make sure that we're going to add some interfacing to the facing side right here. So I'm just going to annotate this so that we don't forget. It only needs to be from this section across. So just add that little note onto your pattern piece. For your front tie pattern piece, just create a rectangle that is 5 centimeters deep by 60 centimeters long. Now this allows for a seam allowance, and it also means that we can place this on the fold. And this is our necktie, cut 1, unfold. And that's your necktie done. The only final little thing that we need to do now is create a facing for the back, because obviously we've taken away the neckband completely by changing the shape of the front and adding that beautiful little tie with the facing. Now we need to create a facing for the back. Take your back bodice pattern piece and just lay a piece of tracing paper over the top. We're literally just going to create the facing, and the facing is 6.5 centimeters deep to match the front at the shoulder seam. So just dash out a little 6.5 centimeter offset from the existing neckline. Okay, so this is the back neck facing, cut 2 in fabric, 2 in interfacing. Grain line is going to follow the same direction as the original bodice, and we're literally just tracing around the entire pattern piece. Beautiful. Brilliant. Okay, we've now completed all the pattern drafting bits that we need to do. That's been really fun. Now what we're going to do is cut out all of our fabric pieces and put on our interfacing, iron that on in the right places, and then come back and join me as I demo the steps that I've altered from the original sewing instructions. The fabric we've chosen to sew this garment in is this gorgeous fabric, which is our Minerva Core Range Prestige polyester crepe fabric in a dusty pink colour. So a nice little option for you to sew this garment in. As you can see, I've already started to prep and sew a couple of steps which are exactly the same as the booklet. So I've already prepared and put all my interfacing on at the relevant points, stay stitched the neckline and also the waistbands. I've then moved on, because we're not doing the neckline like that, I've moved on to step 6. I've sewn up the darts on the back here, as you can see. And I've also sewn the front to the back as per step 7. So it looks like this. At that point, we're going to deviate from the instructions and just follow along with me now. Okay, next take your back neck facing. And we want to add these facings to these ones here. So if this is the center back, these are the sides that we want to attach onto here. So we're going to grab one piece and line it up like that, pin in place. And then take the second piece, take the shoulder seam up here and line it up and pin in place. Sew those together using your standard seam allowance and then overlock the edges or finish the edges using your preferred method. Excellent, then just press those seams open like that. Now we want to next fold them right sides together, and what we want to do is fold the facing at that V and at the center front there, so that the facing matches up with a little notch at the bottom down here. Pin that in place as a little reference, and then pin it at the shoulder seams. And then just continue to pin the facing down to the neckline. Sew that in place using your standard seam allowance. Brilliant. Now trim those corners to reduce the bulk. And then I'd recommend just grading the seam allowance by cutting the facing seam in half. Then just snip into the curves to release the tension. Now you may also want to finish the outside of your facing here so that you've got a really nice finished edge there. So you can do that in multiple ways. You just choose the method you want to. I'm going to overlock it just to keep it nice and neat and consistent with the other finishes that I've done across the garment so far. Wonderful. Okay, so what we want to do now is understitch the seam allowance to the facing. So press the seam allowance towards the facing for both sides, just press it towards the facing to start off with. We're going to understitch this seam now, and as we push the seam allowance towards the facing, we're then going to sew a line of stitches onto the facing, catching the seam allowance down. Now that line of stitches is going to be 3 or 4 millimeters away from the original seam, the fold of the original seam at that point there, and it's going to be 3 or 4 millimeters away on the facing side, capturing the seam allowance underneath. Excellent, so just like that. It's captured it down on the wrong side, so looking really nice and neat on the right side. So next we just want to press that facing under all the way around so that it's nice and smooth. Okay, that's looking gorgeous, isn't it? Next, we're going to insert our little eyelets down the front. So grab your pattern piece, fold it where that fold of the eyelets is, and then just transfer those little reference points onto the front of your pattern piece, and do it for both sides. Next, I'm just going to tack and baste the bottom of this in place so that it doesn't wobble around as I create and mark my eyelets. I'm going to do the same on this side here. Next, create the holes where you want the eyelets to go. I like to use one of these hole punches, but you can use all sorts of different methods. Excellent, so those little holes are now created. Next, take your eyelets and insert them into those 5 holes, so you're going to need 10 sets in total, exactly as per the manufacturer's instructions. The ones I'm using are Prim, which you can get on our website, and this is the Prim Vario Creative tool that I'm going to use to insert my eyelets. This is also available on our website. I'm going to insert the dies into the machine. I'm then going to push one of the bigger head through, add the ring onto the other side, pop it into the machine and just press down, and that creates an absolutely gorgeous little eyelet, beautifully done. Now continue for the rest of them. Gorgeous, isn't that stunning? Okay, so now we've got all of these sorted. The next thing I want to do is to do the necktie. So let's get that, because we need to create a little tie that goes all the way in between. So take your long necktie, it is really long, isn't it? And basically just fold it in half, right sides together, pin it in place, and then we're just going to sew it together using our 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. Trim the seam allowance in half once you've sewn it as well, just to reduce the bulk once you turn it right side out. Next, turn out the necktie using your preferred method, so you can just use like a safety pin and pull it through that way, or you can do what I'm using and use this Prim turning out tool. Okay, great. Once you've done your loop, I've got 2 raw ends at the end. I'm not bothered about those, I'm going to deal with those later. Take your top pieces, and what I want us to do is I just want us to tack together, stay stitched together the very bottom down here, so that it's not going to move around when we sew the waistband onto it. So just stitch that little line together there. Now, as you can see, I've just done that with a series of little zigzag stitches, which we can unpick later. Take one end and just thread it through one of the bottom loops and pull it till it's about halfway through. Take the other end and loop it through the bottom. Poke it through the wrong side and through to the right side. Then just continue to feed them across in a really nice little crisscross shape all the way up to the top. Excellent. And when you've got it all the way tied up, just tie it in a little bow up at the top in the way that you might want to finish it, like the loosest you're going to want to finish it. And then just make sure that you've tidied up the bottom end. So you might want to trim it down a little bit, it might be a bit too long, so you can trim it down a little bit and finish off the ends however you'd like to. I've got these 2 little drawstring ends. I'm just going to finish them off by poking them through the ends here. Okay, so it's going to look something like that. I love how those little ends make and match really beautifully with those eyelets. Okay, so at this point we've basically got up to step 8. Now we're going to follow the original sewing instructions from step 8 all the way through to step 20. So that takes us through to having just finished the zip. Then we don't need to do the neckband, steps 21. 22, 23, 24, but when we come to step 25, so sewing on the sleeves, come back and join me then, and I'll talk you through how to do that because our sleeves are slightly different. Okay, so we've now got our zip in, and as you can see at the top up here, all I've done is I have sewn the facing, turned the facing right side together, sewn it together all the way down to the left of the zipper teeth, and then when you turn it right side out, it gives a beautiful nice, neat finish, just like that. So they're beautiful, really lovely finish. So we've now got a very cute little dress. And the next thing we need to do is we need to add sleeves. Okay, so here's our pattern piece. We've got a notch on the front and then a double notch on the back. And to start off with, we're just going to sew 2 lines of gathering stitches between the notches. The first line of stitches is going to be 5mm from the top, and the second line of stitches is going to be 1cm from the raw edge of the fabric. Now we're going to reinforce the stitches at the beginning but leave long tails of thread at the end so we can pull from one end but keep the other end nice and tight. Brilliant. Next, with the right sides together, fold the sleeves so that the underarm seam is beautifully lined up. Then sew the underarm seam using your 1.5cm seam allowance and finish using your preferred method. Once you've finished the side seam here, sewn and finished that together, we're then going to actually start to create the casing at the bottom. So turn up with wrong sides together, this is wrong sides together, turn up the hem by 1.5cm. So just continue to pin all the way around at 1.5cm, just checking that you're getting a nice consistent distance as you pin. Excellent. What we're going to do now is we are going to sew all the way around just 5mm from the top. So really close to the top, right in the middle of my overlocked stitches here. I'm going to start and stop where my double pins are. And I'm going to put my double pins pretty close to the underarm seam so that it's something that's a little bit hidden as we wear it. So I'm going to start sewing at this point, so all the way around to that point there, leaving a little gap so I can thread my elastic in right at the very end. And of course, repeat for the other sleeve. Brilliant. Okay, so we've done that now. We've got 2 little gaps right in here. The next thing we want to do is to grab some elastic and wrap it round our bicep and cut it where it feels like comfortable. So wrap it round, take that measure, and then cut your elastic, and cut 2 of those. Take a little safety pin and hook it through one end of the elastic. Thread another safety pin through the other end and then just attach it to the seam allowance. Then take the other end of the elastic with the safety pin on and thread it through the casing until it reaches the other side. Once you reach the other side, pull the elastic through, and what we're going to do next is actually just sew the elastic together. This can be quite tricky. So using your sewing machine, sew the 2 ends of elastic so they overlap to create a nice smooth finish. Then once you've sewn them together, all we need to do next is just finish off sewing the casing of the elastic at that point. Brilliant, and then we've got 1 complete sleeve. So what we're going to do now is just repeat that whole process of inserting our elastic into the second sleeve. Okay, perfect, just like that. All we need to do now is attach our sleeves into our bodice, and we're going to do that in a very similar way to the original instructions. Okay, so with right sides facing out, make sure you've got the single notch of the sleeve facing up for both sides. And we're just going to pin the underarm seam to start off with, so just get that nice and accurate. And then just pin along to that first notch on the front and just pin a little bit in between and repeat for the back. So line up the double notch, pin in place, and then continue just to pin around a little bit further if you need to around the bottom underarm curve. All that does is it just makes sure that you're definitely inserting the sleeve in the right way. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to turn it inside out, and so that we can really clearly see that sleeve head. So this section here is our bodice arm side, and this is our sleeve. What we need to do now is just pull on 2 of the strands of thread, 2 that are on the same side, on the wrong side of the sleeve. So grab 2 of them and just gently pull them to create gathers in the sleeve head. Now what we want to do is simply just to reduce the length of the sleeve head so that it's the length of the arm side of the bodice. So we're going to be gathering it in quite a lot. When you think that it's about right, just sort of roughly measure it out. And yeah, that's not quite enough. I'm just going to pull it a little bit more and then just knot it at the end and take that knot all the way down to the sleeve so that it just holds the gathers in place all the way down. Great, so the gathers are not going to change. What we want to do now is just distribute them evenly around the whole of the sleeve head. Now you should have a little notch, the shoulder seam of the bodice, so just pin that in place to start off with, and then you should be able to pin the remaining sleeve in place. Excellent. Once that's all pinned, just sew using your standard seam allowance 1.5 centimeters and finish using your preferred method. And then repeat for the other sleeve. Excellent. So those sleeves have all been sewn in and finished using the overlocker, and it's looking like this, very dramatic. I'm really loving the way that's beginning to shape up. We're almost there now, aren't we? Okay, so the final thing to do is that we just need to hem the garment. We're going to do that in exactly the way it says in the booklet, which is that we're going to overlock the edges, the bottom of the hem, just like I've done here, and then we're going to turn it up wrong side together, 1.5 centimeters, and top stitch it in place. Once you've done that, let's take a look and see what it looks like. This short skirt version of our gorgeous Gemma dress is really giving some fun vibes, isn't it? I love these little puff sleeves, and that center front tie is just giving it a lot more drama than the original pattern piece. So lots of fun little alterations there. Thank you so much for joining me today. I've been Izzy at Minerva. Don't forget that there are loads of other hack videos on our YouTube channel that I filmed for all of our Minerva exclusive sewing patterns, so do check those out. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you next time.